A very good afternoon to everyone. I'm Bite from the Culture Academy and I will be your MC for today. For those who are joining us for the first time, welcome to Culture Academy's In Conversation with series. We have about 250 attendees today. We also like to warm welcome to all our overseas friends who are attending the webinar today. Our In Conversation with series offers an open platform for the arts and culture sector leaders, professionals, and administrators to come together to present or share any aspect of their work and insights. This allows more interesting discussions and cross-pollination of ideas and sharing of best practices on issues that matter to the arts and culture sector. Today, we are very pleased to have with us Dr. Feng Yuzhang, Director, Quantitative Strategy, Data Science and Artificial Intelligence, GovTech, and Mr. Wurn, Programs Director, Singapore Chinese Cultural Center, who will be sharing their views and insights on the topic of Up Your Numbers Game, Turning Data to Decisions. The session will be moderated by Dr. Sharon Chang, Director Research, Culture Academy, Ministry of Culture, Community and Youth, and Chief Research Officer, National Art Council. Once again, please feel free to post your questions under the Q&A function anytime, and our speakers will be able to address them during the Q&A session. Without further ado, I'll now hand the time over to our moderator, Dr. Sharon Chang, to introduce the webinar and the speakers. Sharon, over to you, please.
Good afternoon, fellow public servants, cultural researchers, arts administrators and professionals, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Cultural Academy's Up Your Numbers Game, Turning Data to Decisions webinar. For short, I'm going to say is our Up Yours webinar. And for those dialing in from overseas, okay, that was inappropriate. Those dialing in from overseas, especially warm welcome to Singapore. At least you didn't have to do the PCR. Okay, my name is Sharon Chang, and when I'm not moonlighting as a slightly inappropriate webinar moderator, I head the research units at the Culture Academy of MCCY, as well as the National Arts Council in Singapore. Financial planners and investment gurus are fond of telling us that we should not work so hard for our money. Instead, we should make our money work hard for us. I clearly have not learned my lesson yet. Anyway, in a similar vein, we have two distinguished speakers with us today who will be showing us very practical tips on how to avoid falling into the pit, if not abyss, of toiling for our data, but instead make our data work hard for us. So in addition, I know we have many experienced data nerds, data analysts in our audience today. So I look forward to all your active participation. Treat today's webinar as a first community of practice get together, where we can learn not just from the speakers, but from each other as well. So each of the speaker, I've given them about 15 minutes for their presentation, so they'll rush through, like it's an afternoon chat, people happy to learn from each other. And then we shall leave the rest of the time for Q&A and discussion. Some of you have already sent in your questions. Thank you very much. So we'll try our best to get them all answered. I want to say that our two speakers today wonderfully complement each other. Good curation. I'm not going to strain my hand patting myself on the back. One is a data scientist extraordinaire, while the other is a veteran arts and media professional. One will share principles and best practices on developing data projects and to avoid, as I said, the pitfall of just chasing data for data's sake, while the other will have an actual case study for us. I'm sure you will agree that this is a very exciting lineup. So to get the show on the road, let me quickly introduce our first speaker, Dr. Feng Yuzhang. Yuzhang is with GovTech and is a director overseeing quantitative strategy, data science, and artificial intelligence. He has deep experience across myriad industries, having held research and leadership positions in United Overseas Bank, KPMG, SAS, for all those of you who have done statistics in university, that's a sort of software close to our hearts, and A-Star. So he specializes in advanced analytics, machine learning, and data science. I'm just going to caution, you can ask him anything, but not how to bypass bank systems. You're not going to be responsible for fraud. Anyway, over to you, Yuzhang.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Sharon, for the excellent introduction. Let me just bring up my slide. Give me a second. Please let me know if you are able to see the slide.
Yep, it's up, Yuzhang, go ahead.
Excellent. Right, okay, so good afternoon, everyone. My name is Feng Yuzhang. As mentioned, I'm actually from the quantitative strategy team or QX for short, of Data Science and AI Division in GovTech. So a bit of introduction of my team to also set a context of why I'm here today. So DSAID is a strategic capability center set up within GovTech with a mandate and mission to actually support the digital transformations of the whole of government through data science and AI. As a key pillar within the DSAID, QS focuses a lot on the agency partnerships, where we support agency data analytics initiatives by one, providing technical subject matter expertise, and two, manpower resources. To date, we have partnered with many agencies, MCCY included, and forward deployed our data science specialists to agencies to support their initiatives. Over the years, we have done tens of data science projects with agencies where we attempt to use data analytics to help agencies make better decisions. Based on some of the learnings that we have gained from these projects over the years, today I'm very glad to be here to share on the topic of how can we go about decision-driven data analytics. Some of you may wonder, shouldn't it be data-driven decision-making, which is a more commonly heard term? This is exactly the point I would like to make and share today. Let me try to explain the difference. So in the most concise way, data-driven decision-making is like finding a purpose for data, i.e. you start with your data. Whereas decision-driven data analytics is more about finding data for a purpose, i.e. you start with a purpose or by identifying a problem you want to solve. Let me walk you through the frame with a specific example. First, we need to identify what is the current process or the current state. Right? Imagine you are in the marketing department and then you are tasked to actually promote the upcoming events organized by your agency or your company. Currently, what you do is by sending generic emails, newsletters, or conducting social media campaigns. Secondly, you want to be able to identify what are the limitations or pain points of a current process, or what is the problem, right? So in this particular example, it could be that marketing actions are not tailored to the receiving participants and resulting in a low click-through rate or registration rate. Next, what could be the improvement look like? Or in the transformation world, what is the common picture of success? And who will actually benefit from it? In this particular example, we can aspire that the marketing strategy to be engaging the customers in each segment appropriately based on their behavioral patterns and preferences. And of course, the firm would likely to benefit from it. Last, what constraints or knowledge gaps are there to actually stop you from reaching that improvement? In this particular example, it could be the lack of knowledge on the different segments of the customers. It could also be the fact that the person that doesn't know how to actually measure the effectiveness of the marketing strategy. You will realize so far up to this point, we haven't even talked about any data or analytics techniques at all. All discussions are at the business level, trying to identify the problem. Moving on, very often, we also try to capture problems through user stories. This is a very simple template, which we find very useful and practice it in every single project that we do. It goes like this. As an end user, I want to, so that I can. There are three parts to it, which we need to fill in. First, the person who will most likely to be using the solution, whether it's in the form of insights, models, or a tool, whichever is developed through the project. Second, the problem statements identified or the objective, which is likely to be informed by the constraint that the end user faces. Third, the goal or the actionable, how the end user will do things differently if the project is successful. In our example, it can go like this. As someone named Rachel from the marketing team, I want to understand the different segments of our audience based on their behavior patterns and preferences so that I can develop targeted marketing strategies to test the most effective ways of re-engaging infrequent attenders and deepen audience engagements. I would like to highlight that framing problems in this manner allow us to focus on whose needs we are addressing, what these needs are, and how addressing them will actually lead to course of action. The last point about identifying link to course of action is extremely important. Inability to do so is a common pitfall for many organizations new to data analytics, and often result in projects finishing as a proof of concept and not translating into actual business values. The next concept is what we call thinking wide, then narrow. Sounds quite abstract, I know, but it's actually quite simple. I mentioned about starting with the goal that we want to achieve. Then we break it down into the different possible course of actions that we can take. Here, we think wide first, meaning we want to generate many alternative courses of actions based on the ultimate goal. Then with those, we think narrow, by letting the decision makers use their judgment to actually decide which potential course of action to focus on. We observed by doing this, first wide, then narrow, decision makers increase the likelihood that the final considerations includes high quality and feasible courses of action. Now, we need to further sharpen the problem statements by breaking it down further. What do I mean by that? We ask ourselves, what are the questions we need to answer to decide which specific course of action to take? In other words, we try to create very specific lines of inquiries. And only now you see that we come to data. We ask ourselves what data we need, where we can find them. Is the data available, or is the data of the reasonable data quality for us to use? I keep stressing this. The problem solving process starts from the top, i.e. the goal, and not from the bottom, i.e. the data. However, for data analytics to empower decision makers, data should be collected with the analytics in mind. We experience a lot of challenges in this area on the ground, working with different agencies on their data analytics projects. Let me explain what I mean by that. Many times we talk to agency counterparts who may have a very brilliant ideas for a data analytics project. It could be about policies, it could be around some programs, or even products. Unfortunately, however, there are some common work habits which lead to some downstream issues for analytics projects. Let me give you some examples. For example, for policies, it's often the case that data may not be deliberately generated or tracked, or because the data is actually collected via surveys, the data can be incomplete. And what this means is that this could lead to data being very subjective instead of objective, and the subsequent analysis that actually require many caveats and assumptions given the data gap. For programs, data may be generated, data may actually facilitate current admin or logistical demands instead of future ones. So what this means is downstream, we often have to work with dirty data or unlinkable data. For products, data may be very transactional focused rather than serving an analytical purpose. And they are often captured in logs, which are highly costly to convert into analyzable format. Obviously, this also creates, this also compromise the quality of the analytics downstream. In other words, in such situations, there is what we call analytics debt accumulated, which is the problem of dealing with inadequate and unusable data because the product, the policy, the program owner did not deliberately plan for data collection and analytics upstream. So how do we tackle that? This requires a bit of mindset shift as well as process change. And borrowing the terms like security by design, we call it analytics by design, or ABD. Okay, so this is how we usually roll out a policy or run a program or build a product. So basically we do that, and this will generate mostly transactional data, as I mentioned. And then at the end of it, we try to figure out with those data that is produced, how we use them actually for data analytics and try to use the insights to improve and complete the cycle. So how could we have done it differently to actually incorporate the idea of analytics by design? It's basically to front load the whole process with 2 additional steps. The first is to actually formulate some questions that you would like to ask, and also some actions that you would like to take after you roll out the policy, run the program, or build a product. And then after that, we try to simulate some analysis with the existing or even mock-up data to see whether those data points, data collection decisions make sense. So what that means is after that, after you have rolled out this policy, run the program, build a product, you actually find yourself, with not only the transactional data, but also analyzable data, which you can immediately use for analytics. So this front loading or the additional 2 steps before we actually do the rollout of the policy, program, or product actually allow us to actually fill this data gap and make our subsequent analytics more efficient. Another aspect I feel which is extremely important when running data analytics project is to adopt the agile working style. There are 3 aspects to it. First, flexibility. So as much as we try to understand the business context, gather business requirements at the beginning of the projects, there's always some changes in the requirements along the way, major or minor. So analogically, instead of using a cannon, aim, shoot, and very likely miss the target, we try to use a homing missile, which can do course correction along the way. So in our context, what we do is basically we try to maintain regular contact with the business users, frequently obtain feedback, and make adjustments accordingly. Secondly, quick feedback. Related to the first point, we want to make sure the developers, the data scientists, data engineers, analysts is as close to the business users as possible. Not only will this reduce the time taken for feedback to happen, but also avoid information loss in translation, as you can see in the picture. Lastly, iteration. Right? We want to be able to start small with a minimum viable product or MVP and iterate from there. So you can see in the picture, the top part is not what we call an iterative approach, as you don't have a working vehicle until very late stage 4. Whereas the bottom one is, although you start with a primitive, but at least it's a working one. So this is especially true when we are building a machine learning model, and then there's a pipeline that we set up to iteratively improve the performance of the model until it reaches a satisfactory level. In summary, I try to put side by side what we mean by data-driven versus decision-driven. So for data-driven, it's anchored on data, whereas decision-driven is anchored on decisions or goals. Data-driven led by data scientists, decision-driven led by decision makers. For data-driven, we start from what is known, and then for the decision-driven, we start from what is unknown. We go deep first, depth first for data-driven, and width first for decision-driven. Bias can be perpetuated in a data-driven approach, whereas more readily challenged in the decision-driven approach. We feel this is more effective for the reason that the decision-driven approach is tied to action. It is answering the questions that matter and also challenges beliefs. I would like to end my presentation with a quote or a reference made by the GM of Tipco, the analytics software company, which goes, computers are useless. They can only give you answers. Don't let tech lead your tech. Be decision-driven, not data-driven. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yuzhang, for that concise but very rich and very informative presentation. As a data nut personally, I love numbers and trying to discover patterns in the data. I am occasionally guilty of the sins you have pointed out. And so thank you for the timely reminder that we must be sharp and focused in defining the problem or the decision we want to make first. I would also point out one other reminder that resonated with me, that's on slide 7, the importance of collaborating for program designers and policymakers, of collaborating with the research or data department from the very beginning, rather than try to throw the problem to your data scientists or research colleagues and say, find me evidence to help me advocate. Okay, now we are ready to move to the second speaker. Let me introduce him, Mr. Wurn. If you find his name or his face familiar, then you know your local TV professionals very well. Wurn was previously the Vice President of Chinese Entertainment Productions in MediaCorp, where he produced popular variety shows such as Comedy Nights, the NKF charity shows, and the annual Glitzy Star Awards and Super Bands. He has also launched festivals and music stations. I told you it's a wonderful compliment, right, on both our speakers. Today, Wurn is the Programs Director of the Singapore Chinese Cultural Centre, SCCC, where he oversees programs that promote Chinese Singaporean culture. So he's going to talk to us about the actual application of using data analytics at their exhibition galleries. So take it away, Wurn.
Thank you, Sharon, for the wonderful introduction. And good afternoon, everyone. Hello, Yuzhang. Okay, let me share my slides. Can everyone see my slides?
Yes, you do.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Culture Academy, for giving me this chance to share a case study for decision-driven data analytics in the arts and culture sector. So before I begin on this specific case, let me give a short intro to Singapore Chinese Cultural Centre. Now, we believe in a vibrant Singapore Chinese culture rooted in a cohesive, multiracial society. And we really set out to nurture Singapore Chinese culture and enhance social harmony. We have actually launched our permanent exhibition known as Wurn, Discovering Chinese Singaporean Culture, because we believe that our Chinese Singaporean culture is one that is complex and ever-changing. And we want visitors who come visit us at the permanent exhibition to join in the conversation and discover or rediscover what it means to be a Chinese Singaporean. Okay, Wurn is divided into 6 zones. We were open last year on the 29th of February. Okay, and then we were forced to close because of the pandemic. Okay, and so what happened is in the 6 zones, zone 1 is what makes us us. We look at factors that shape our identity, namely our Chinese heritage, our intercultural actions between the communities, and the other factor is public policies. Yep. So it's actually our Chinese heritage, our public policies, as well as our interactions interculturally. Okay, in zone 2 is beyond generations, where we look at habits and traditions and customs that are passed down from one generation to another. and the setting is really one of a HDB flat. In zone 3, it looks like a playground that all Singaporeans can relate to. It's known as When Cultures Meet. So influences among the Chinese between the different dialect groups and between us as well as other ethnic communities, influencing each other in terms of our language and our food types. So these are the 3 zones. The 4th zone is Made in Singapore. So local brand names and products that are household names that are created in Singapore are featured here. In zone 5, we call it Making Our Mark, brand names and products that actually go beyond our shores and gain recognition either regionally or internationally. And the last zone is known as Zone T. It's the story so far, where we have a timeline table, an interactive timeline table showing history of our different key events and how we move on from here. So these are the 6 zones that we have. And in Singaporean, our permanent exhibition, we make use of what we call the RFID interactives, a system that will collect data. Visitors who come to the exhibition will be wearing RFID wristbands. There are 3 colors to choose from. There's green, there's yellow, there's blue. And after a simple registration process, they will go on and visit the exhibition. In the exhibition, in the various zones, there'll be opportunities to interact with the different displays at different exhibits. And this is how we collect our data. And the data that we can get from these RFID interactives include how many visitors interact with which exhibits. And we will know which exhibits are the most popular. We have a number of videos in the gallery, especially in zone 3. So we will know what are the views for each video in the gallery and how much time do visitors spend watching these videos. And very importantly, how much time do visitors spend in the gallery. When the gallery was designed, we make an estimation based on the floor space and the scale of the exhibits. It takes about 45 minutes for a one complete visit. And so we will know how much time visitors really spend in the gallery. And of course, from the data, we will understand the trends, whether which zone is doing better than the other, influencing the themes as well. And of course, the popularity of the video content types and the overall visitor experience. We now understand that from the data that's given last year, the average time spent in the permanent exhibition is 58 minutes, and this year is about 53. So on an average, it's about 56 minutes, well above the 45 minutes that we planned. And in zone 3, we feature a lot of local food types. And last year, visitors are able to vote for their favorite local food. And Hainanese chicken rice was ranked #1 with more than 5,700 votes. But this year, it has been taken over by Nanyang Coffee and Kaya Toast with more than 18,000 votes. And the series of these videos that we show in zone 3, we also show the number of views here, which is all things Peranakan, Chinese puppetry, comic artists, mobile Getai, Peranakan beats, and what is Singlish. So we will know when we update the content in the gallery from time to time, we will know what video to retire and what new video to bring in based on this data. And of course, the RFID interactives, these are the graphs that illustrate the data that I shared just now. These in zone 3. And these are the videos. Graphically, you'll see the bars in orange showing this year's data, and the ones in blue will be last year's data for the number of views per video. And in the final zone, in zone T, where we show a timeline table, these graphs actually show which period the visitors interact most on the timeline table. Yep. So that wraps up my presentation on the data we collect from Singaporean. And we feel that it's, while the visitors are actually having fun interacting with the exhibits, they are actually providing valuable data for us to improve the overall visitor experience for them when they come back again. And that's why data analytics works very well in Singaporean. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ewan, for giving us
Sharon.
Such a delightful appetizer of what SCCC is doing. I was just getting into it. I was like really staring at the graphs, and then you like turn it off. It's like, okay, so I'm gonna like invite people to ask you some more questions on some of these like very interesting data, like, you know, because it really speaks to our cultural preferences, you know, what in our, which part of history, you know, either which part of history appeals most to us, or people from which part of the decade are the most frequent visitors to your galleries. Right. So I would also suggest perhaps Yuzhang, so this is the beginning of collaborations, right? Perhaps Yuzhang can help incorporate cameras and probes into the screens, which can then help to track facial expression, pupil dilation, and heightened pulses of the visitors, right? Since you're wearing the RFID on the wrist. And that tells us how emotionally engaged they are with the exhibits, and even at what point, you know, in the sort of video that they feel most connection. So, you know, with machine learning, right, nothing's impossible now. We are able to capture some of these patterns that indicate pride, you know, good memories, you know, cohesion. Yeah. So you see, there is a sometimes advantage of being driven by data first. So many patterns, so exciting. Okay. Anyway, before I get to the questions some of you have raised at the point of registration, let me first open the floor to people who would like to ask questions live through the Q&A section. I always favor the brave. Anyone wants to quickly type in some question and answers that you like Yuzhang or Ewan to answer? Okay. Aha. Okay. We already have 8 questions there. Okay, I'm going to favor Stephen because his initials exactly resemble mine, but it's also number 1 on the list. Okay, Stephen wants to know, he's curious to hear about the value of qualitative research and data ethnographic observations, interviews, diary studies, and how they factor towards decision making. So far we've been talking about, like, you know, data, how many people go to visit, you know, how they engage and all that. But what about the qual side? Maybe if I can invite Ewan first to give us the experience of people who might, you know, maybe in the past, if people writing in their feedback, or you might have introduced some journaling as a sort of research method, or even whether your social media team will actually track, you know, what people say about the exhibitions and then feedback on that. Then after that, Yuzhang, I'll also invite you to also reflect on this bit. If it's all about like words, emotions, you know, what are some of the, I suppose, some methods or software we can use for those of us who are newer to this area. Okay, so Ewan, you go first.
For all our programs, what we do is we have visitor surveys. We have post-event surveys. So it can be an online program, it can be a live event. And another source of data for us is actually from our annual perception survey, which we actually kick off in 2019 with a youth-based survey, and then we go island-wide, which is a dipstick survey. So based on this data, we will get the trends that we want to know, whether is there any patterns, is there any preference in terms of the content that audience wants to see, the kind of content that attract them, and we will program accordingly. And we understand that trends do change because culture is ever changing. So we do look back at this data, you know, every 6 months or so, and adjust our strategy along the way.
Yuzhang?
Yeah, okay. So I think from a technical standpoint, right, I think recently, in the recent years, there is a vast advancement in terms of, you know, natural language processing in computer vision. So those techniques actually play a big part in helping us understand, or in a quantitative way, to actually understand how people feel, whether it's through their facial expressions, as you say, or through the understanding of their writings, right? So not only we can actually pick up exactly what are the topics that being talked about, and also their sentiments towards it, or the breakdown of the sentiments. In the past, we can only know, is it positive or is it negative, but now we can actually break it down to even different levels, right? Are they anxious about something? Are they excited about something, etc., etc. So all these things, I think, give us opportunity to actually combine the qualitative and quantitative side of the house to actually create a more holistic understanding of the environment. And I guess it's really, like you said, there's no boundary now to actually how we can use technology to understand this better. I think back to my earlier point, it's really about what kind of problem we want to address, how we want the technology to actually help us.
Okay, thanks, Yuzhang. I know my colleague from SPFD, the threat planning research, is here. Jian, I'm going to call on him to sort of answer this as well, because I know MCCY does take on some of these studies, and some of you might be interested in knowing about that. So can the organizer unmute Jian so that he can speak? Jian, if you're there, would you like to talk about how you're using qualitative data, sort of like the deep and thick data instead of just numbers?
Yeah, hi Sharon. Thanks for giving me a
the
chance.
arrow.
Yes, I felt it very much in the cockles of my heart. Yeah, but
don't take umbrage.
but getting back to the question, I do agree that there's value in this type of a mixed methods approach, where you marry the data you collected widely, so maybe your more general population survey type data get from administrative sources, data from visitors, like what was shared earlier at the Chinese Cultural Center. So from there you get a general sense of what's happening, but usually you don't have the depth, right, of why do people like certain things, why do people do certain things. So that's where the ethnography, the qualitative in-depth interviews comes in to complement what you get from the broad sensing. So we have done several studies where we try to incorporate both this sort of data types, and I think policymakers in particular find them very useful, because it gives added depth and color to why certain things turn out that way, right? So it gives us a good reason on a bit of insight into the psyche of why certain architects, for example, may behave in certain ways through in-depth interviews. So I do think that there's a lot of scope to marry those different qualitative and quantitative techniques. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Jian. I would also tell Stefan that, our colleagues over, I think, in the Ministry of Social and Family Development, if anyone's from MSF here, they do also rely quite a bit on deep ethnographic studies data. Okay, not to just spend all the time on one question. Let me quickly move to Delvin's question. Or maybe before that, I'll move to Geraldine's question, because it was a similar question to what I had about RFID. So Geraldine says RFID is great, but costly. So how can not-for-profit organizations afford such gadgetry, and how do visitors respond to using it? So, I mean, the perception is that RFID is a tracking device, and, there might be some people, nowadays everybody's paranoid, right? That you're being tracked through, I don't know, the vaccines that are in your body as well, and through ivermectin, I don't know. So how do you, number one, I suppose, what is the sort of cost, the outlay, both for setup as well as for maintenance? And then secondly, how do you get over the hurdle that people are those who are unwilling to sort of carry this RFID around? Ewan?
We actually weigh it against the results that we are able to obtain, through an RFID system. So while software and hardware is developing, all the time, some are getting cheaper ways of achieving the same results. We do look out for such methods as well. So I guess it's really how you weigh, the methods that you want to embark upon, getting what kind of results. So RFID was used for our Singaporean, and we found it to be effective. And I'm sure if there are other cheaper options and all that, we would consider as well. Yeah.
Yes. So in other words, Geraldine, that's the cheapest option available. I suppose from the view of the, I speak as a researcher, so sometimes when my bosses balk at my proposed purchase of new software, I'm just like, it'll pay for itself in the long run. You just have to believe. Okay, Delvin has see all the case study. Everybody's very excited about it. Delvin has another question for Ewan. He says, I wonder if you can share one or two of the improvements you made to the exhibits based on the data that was collected.
Okay, in our fifth zone, where we show products that actually gain regional or international recognition, we actually invite visitors to propose what are the new items to add to these products and brand names. And all these are actually displayed in the form of a conveyor belt. And so this is one way where we will change our products from time to time based on the feedback we get from the visitors. Because some, for instance, salted egg potato chips, there are items that are actually trendy with the times. So they do change from time to time, and we will respond to these requests. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Ewan. So I'm always afraid that Yuzhang will feel a little left out. So I'm going to pose a question to Yuzhang so we can all have a party together. So I'm going to take one question which came in when the registrants signed up. So this question is really to deal with, it's more like quite philosophical as well, this strategy question. So I invite Yuzhang to reflect on what are the cons or the danger of using data to drive policy changes, and how can we avoid that?
I think that's a really good question. I think there are two things I can think of. I think the first one, I keep going back to what I presented earlier, but I think it's the approach that we take, whether that help us go from the problem that we want to address. That's why I won't repeat anymore, because I think I discussed quite a bit during the presentation. I think the second question is second concern is actually related to the bias in the data, right? So for example, if you're talking about, we want to get a sense of what people think about certain policy, right? And then we try to use, for example, data from the social media to try to get a gauge, right? And then if we are not careful enough, our insights may be biased towards those that actually use the social media actively rather than the whole of the population. I think this, from a technical standpoint or from a methodology standpoint, that could be the danger if we haven't used the methodology properly.
Okay, I'm going to push you a little further on this topic, because I was looking at your last one where you compared, data-driven and decision-driven, where the decision maker actually leads the whole process on your right-hand side. So, but then how do we then mitigate the danger of having a biased decision maker, right? Because he only knows maybe a certain scope. Whereas when we start with data, we say let the data speak for itself and patterns emerge. So how can I mitigate that problem of not allowing, or when the decision maker's bias comes into play before I can even explore other options?
I think if you see how I try to break it down from the goals, to the course of action, to lines of inquiry, to data, that is a tool or a mechanism for us to arrive at the lines of inquiry or the data to be used to analyze in a very logical fashion. So it allows us to think whether the different course of action is a logical breakdown from the goal that we want to achieve. So with that kind of a tool in place, we can sort of avoid this kind of problem to a certain extent. That's one. Second is eventually we will still need to use data to validate the business hypothesis that is raised by the business users, right? So whatever, whether it's a hypothesis or assumption that we have used to actually derive those lines of inquiry, we'll need to use data to validate those anyway. So I think those are the two approach, or the ways that we actually employ in our projects to avoid the situation that you have mentioned.
Yeah, thanks, Yuzhang. Before I also call on Ewan to reflect on the question, I'm still reminded when you were talking about, I'm not intending to get into politics, but the sort of reminder was that the Trump election, right? So Trump was convinced that he had won the election, and then all his data also showed that he had won the election. So, okay, Ewan, take it away, your turn.
Yep. I think in the scenario of, let's say, a museum setting, and if you collect data, it's really from the museum goers. So it means that the data collected could be skewed towards the demographic or community that is already into cultural content, or at least has some interest in it. So if you're going to make revisions to the gallery based on this set of data alone, there is a danger that it will only cater for the initiated.
Yeah, good point. Thanks, Ewan. Okay, I'm going to get to a question by Winkin. He asks, how does qualitative research, it's a little bit like what we talked about earlier, but his is quite more specific into like, how do we, is there a shift, right? How does qualitative research intersect with quantitative methods in a decision-based, data-driven approach? And do we, unconsciously shift towards more quantitative approaches into this context simply because it's easier to collect? Maybe Yuzhang first.
Yeah, so I would have to say, yes, I sort of agree that there's a shift in that. I think probably because in the past, for one, it's not so easy for us to collect so much data, and hence people may have to employ a more qualitative approach when analyzing certain things. Whereas for now, I think storage, all these, it's less of a concern. And also people are more aware of the importance of data, and hence they are consciously collecting them in the whole process. So, and also at the same time, with the proliferation of the capabilities, right, there are more people with the skill sets to actually do this at the working level. And when people, especially when things are research results or analysis results are backed by data, it come across very strong and reliable. So hence, I think in many areas, not just government, I think not just the cultural domain, I think I'm seeing more more adoption of quantitative approach when analyzing certain topic. So, for example, this is from my previous experience. Even in the banking domain, in the past, when people doing research on the market, they rely on researchers reading through a lot of publications. Whereas now, there are a lot of cutting-edge approach or tools to actually tap onto big data technology or natural language processing techniques to do this, either as a complementary approach or even taking a more dominant role. So yeah, so from a technical standpoint, I would say yes, there is a shift that we are observing.
Okay, thanks, Yuzhang. Okay, we'll go to Ken from NCS's question, back to application of data, the use of data. So what has been done with data and RFID gathered to enhance the visitor experience? Because even in your example, you told us about how you would change exhibits, but I suppose Ken's question is more like, making the experience, I don't know, more special or more heartwarming. Have you used the data gathered for this?
We have used, let's see, so far it's been directly at updating content. Can't think of any other ways that we are using the RFID data. Yeah.
So I would, I suppose, add to Ewan's answer for Ken, that is, that's a challenge of using the present sort of technology that we have, that it collects behavior, actions, right, movement, but it doesn't tell you what's going on in the heads, in the hearts and mind of people. And that's the challenge of behavioral data. You can just tell from the actions. So the advantage of our surveys in the past is that you can ask people into the interviews and you can dive deep into how they feel and all that. But of course, then the other side we're going to say, but then that's what people say, so right? So you don't really know whether it is what they mean. So that I would say, with every, as researchers, we have to always be cognizant that with every method we choose, there are always the drawbacks and the caveats. And the recommendations that we put out, I mean, if it's going to lead to a huge investment, then I think it behooves us as a cultural, public policy, public servants to really either commission or take a little more time to dive deeper to find out what the reasons are behind certain things.
Yeah, of course, besides the RFID, our visitor survey and all that will still go on to supplement so that we get a more complete response from the data. Yeah.
And an anecdote that comes to mind is a previous Time journal study that we did at the MCCY. So we got people to track their what happened, what the sort of activities they do throughout the day, and then they reflect on their feelings, right? How the state of mind. And so we found this interesting correlation. So people said that doing sports improved their sense of well-being. But unfortunately for me and us, those from the National Arts Council, people who do arts do not say that they are happier or feel a greater sense of well-being. So if that were a very superficial response to this, then we would say, aha, then government should completely fund sports because that makes people happy and forget about arts. Until we sort of sit back and take a while to reflect and realize that, the purpose of the arts is not only to make you happy, haha. If you wanted to, you can just go, watch a cartoon or something, a Transformer movie. But really, I mean, the purpose of the arts is also to make you reflect deeper on yourself as an individual, on ourselves as a community, on the country, or even the relations, right? So, I mean, arts, we often say, my colleagues will say that it provides a safe place for discourse to discuss like difficult issues. So again, this just, for me, it's a reminder that we really have to be researchers, have to be very conscious of zooming in on the right type of question first of all, and then approaching the right type of method. So that's why mixed methods to me is best. Don't just rely on data, but just marry the both. And thirdly, when it comes to interpretation, don't just come from a sort of looking at the numbers thing, but consult widely people on the ground and take some time to think about the issues. I mean, these are not, I think rocket science, these are not new conclusions, but it very often in the rush to get, I think, information or insights out, we don't spend enough time.
Yeah, we miss them. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry for that little philosophical digression. Okay, going back to registrant questions, we have someone who asked a question on capabilities, and maybe Yuzhang can help answer that. So what should a staff who's just learning about data crunching learn? Would it be familiarity with a data processing platform? Why and what are the software used?
Okay, so to me, there are different levels to this question, right? First is actually is the analytical mindset that one needs to have, right? To be able to reason, to be able to make logical inferences, to be able to break down the problem, into the smaller, more that we can tackle, that kind of a level. I think that is one particular analytical skill set that we are talking about. And then these are not related to any techniques or any tools that we are talking about. It's ability to think and reason, right? That's one. And it's an important one. Secondly, I think it's more related to the skill set or the methods or the methodology that we are talking about, right? Because data science is a field where it's all important about what to do, when to do what. What's the right thing to do when you are in certain situations, when you are faced with certain data, right? So there's a quite well-established methodology to it. For example, before you do a certain modeling, you need to understand the behavior of the data. You need to do certain checks. You need to make sure the quality is okay. There's a practice to it. So to me, the person need to learn the practice. And then again, this is on the methodological level and nothing specific to certain tools. And in fact, there are multiple tools out there to actually allow one to do so. Some are drag and drop, which is more easier to maneuver, to actually use. Some are more sophisticated, like coding based, right? So to repeat, for one, I think the analytical mindset is definitely someone to train. For another, is actually the methodology that someone need to be comfortable and proficient in. And last is actually the actual doing it. So like I said, once you know the methodology, once you know the practice, now it's actually choosing the tool that is you are comfortable and you have access to, whether it's NIME, SAS, IBM, open source, R, Python, they are all out there. And then one has the flexibility to choose which one to learn. But as a matter of fact, or the state of art, I think Python is emerging as one of the most important or well-used, most commonly used programming language, and for us to do data analysis, modeling, various tasks. So if one aspires to be a true data scientist, I think the language to learn is probably Python.
Okay. Thanks, Yuzhang. I will again remind our audience here, if you feel at any one time that you do have the answers to some of these questions as well, you would like to share, feel free to just raise your hand and I will call on you and give you the mic. Okay, while you think about doing that and sharing your knowledge, let me answer Rachen's question. So it's to our both our presenters in general, and it's a very real practical problem nowadays because people are now very conscious of all the PDPA and all that sort of act and all these questions about leakage. It's not good to build confidence in giving up their personal data. So Rachel's question is, how do you navigate the usefulness and potential of data collection and data analytics versus the increasing desire among people nowadays for greater privacy and less data collection about their activities online? Maybe Yuzhang first.
Yeah, sure. I think, again, there are two levels or two angles we can look at this, right? So firstly, when we say data privacy, we are talking about whether it's personal identifiable information, right? Whether someone can actually tell that particular data point belongs to Yuzhang, right? And then once that happens, people may get very uncomfortable with it, right? I think that's the key point that I want to highlight here. And but in many use cases, in many applications, actually such information is not really required. You don't need to know exactly who this person is to actually make use of the data, right? You just need to know the profile, right? This is like, a 40-year-old, which industry, what kind of demographic characteristics, blah, 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 to be able to use the data, right? So in that way, we sort of course, enough communication need to be made to the data subject, to say that, oh, your personal identifiable information is not disclosed, but we actually use this more at an aggregated level, right? That's the first thing. The second thing is actually, I think nowadays with the advancement of certain technologies, for example, federated learning, right? Some of these data sharing issues has been tackled to a certain extent. So what do I mean by that, right? In the past, for example, if you want to create a holistic view of an individual, right? So we need to go to various sources to obtain the information. For example, one source for actually the demographic, one source for education, one source for social, blah, blah, right? And for us to actually build a holistic view and then to potentially build a model on this person, you need to have the physical access to all this data. And now with the advancement of federated learning, right, it can be the case that this data can still reside on each site, and then there is certain kind of algorithm to actually go across the different sites to achieve the same thing without having to move the data. that is in a way very much addresses some of these data sharing issues. So to summarize, I think my response is in two angles. One is the privacy relating to the personal identifiable information. One is related to the data sharing issue.
Okay, thanks, Yuzhang. Ewan?
Yeah, I totally agree with Yuzhang, because a lot of this information, if it's unnecessary, that people are not comfortable sharing, is really not necessary to solicit such data from them. And increasingly, technologies have indeed helped in many areas to get the kind of profiling and data that we need. So there's no need to like the good old days, where a lot of parameters are actually obtained, but it's actually quite unnecessary.
Okay, thanks, Ewan. Cheryl has asked actually a question on given that a lot of audience engagement is online, so what are the types of data that can be obtained without serving audiences or needing heavy manpower resources to collect? Maybe Ewan, you take on this first.
For online content, we normally look at the views. So there's a definition to that. For some, it's 3 seconds is considered a view. And I think increasingly, we are also looking at other parameters such as viewing time, of a content. So we know how much does a viewer actually watch or consume the data. So there are all these different parameters to give us the measurements of the success of a video or of an online content.
Yuzhang, do you have anything to add to Ewan's?
I think just to add on to that, I think when we try to use social media data, I think the first level is always the views, the time stay. Those things can give you a sense of it's one of the metrics that we can track. Then further to that, we can also look into, like I mentioned earlier, the topic that they discussed, their sentiment, or even if access is available, the same people, how they actually behave on the other platforms, right? So I think, for example, if you see the person doing something on the Facebook, what is his behavior or her behavior on, let's say, Instagram, right? So these are things that we can, if we have data to actually link and analyze, that will give more insights.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Yuzhang. I would also add there's a lot of very sophisticated companies out there. I mean, again, for a price, right? That will help you to sort of cull together from different sources. The most popular, of course, being your Google searches, your Instagram, I think, for photo posting through Instagram, your increasingly, I don't know whether your TikTok stories, all of that can also be pieced together to give a very quite an accurate story. But again, it's of course back to the price of how much you're willing to pay. Right. Okay, Benedict has raised his hand. Oh, has lowered his hand. Benedict, do you want to still ask a question? Jun, how if you could unmute Benedict so that, he's left the attendance. Okay. Okay, I'm sorry, Benedict, wherever you are. I didn't see your hands earlier. Okay, I'm going to go to question back to the set that was sent in earlier about the registration, which is an interesting question that sort of bugged us researchers in the arts for a long time. How do you determine the quality of a program? What people, from the data collected? I mean, it can tell you popularity, but is it I suppose, is it an endorsement of the quality of the program? Ewan, you have to answer this question because
of course, very directly, we have our program satisfaction scores from surveys. So, and that can be further broken down into different parts, whether the satisfaction is with the content, with the duration of the program, with the venue where it's held, if it's a live event, and even facilities like hardware and all that. So that's how we determine an overall quality of a program. Yeah.
I would say to the person who asked that question is quality at the end of the day is subjective, right? To someone, Louis Vuitton is the ultimate in quality. To someone, it's what you're just paying for the brand name, right? So I think at the end of the day, if we are able to decompose that quality to really what you think you want your program, or rather either the emotional or the aesthetic, or back to the popularity, the resonance with people goals, then it's easier for the researcher, the data scientist, to suggest options for that. Right? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Sorry, it seems a bit like a cop-out, but it's not. I mean, it's an issue that we have grappled with. What is, the quality of, I don't know, even maybe from your days in MediaCorp, what is the quality program, right? What is the quality show? Yeah.
I think habits are also changing because, I mean, many years ago, before days of internet and all that, when only entertainment is, let's say, just free-to-air channels. So a highly rated program back then could be just due to, lack of other alternatives, because the box will be on, even though not many people are watching, but it's the only form of entertainment. But compared to the current situation, there are so many things fighting for attention, all our devices. So I think it really is a sign of the times, I guess.
Yeah, true. Okay, Ken from NCSS has another question. So he wants to know whether we analyze the data together with the profiles of the participants. We all into segmentation, how we can better reach out, and in the most, I suppose, using the right levers to different tribes or different demographics. So I don't know whether from the RFID you're able to do that, but from, I think, maybe your surveys, you'll probably be able to. But anyway, that's Ken's question.
Yeah. From the surveys, yeah, we can do
From the surveys, you do that.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Let me get to a question from Delvin. So Delvin's question is, if the problem is identified as how do we attract more visitors, can Yuzhang share the kind of data that he would want to collect so that he can then recommend a policy or a strategy?
Sorry, I lost track of the
question is
question.
Okay. Yeah.
Got it. Because it jumps up and down, so I couldn't catch it. Yeah. So it's a rather a test put on the spot. I guess, like I mentioned, there is a few layers to go through before we reach the data level, right? So I think from a methodology point of view, right, if the goal is to attract more visitors, I think we need to go to the next level, the actions, right? What are the courses of action you can take to actually achieve that, right? So, and then from there, you need to go down one level, ask questions of, for example, what are the current set of visitors to the whatever museum or show, right? To actually understand the current profiles, which are the white space you can actually tackle, etc., etc. So I can't really give a straight up answer, but basically that is the steps you go through to reach that. To actually, if you are really interested, to do this, feel free to engage us, for discussion further. We're very happy to extend the service.
Okay, thanks, Yuzhang. Okay, I'm going to arrow myself because Stefan has a question about doing studies in the area of community or well-being space. So his question specifically is research in the intersections of arts, tech, and well-being applied in contexts like workplaces and hospital settings are gaining traction in places like Australia. So these studies provide often rich insights to the cultural and contextual factors that evolve with how users interact with arts and well-being. So where do we see research in Singapore advancing in similar areas? And how should researchers transitioning out of academia approach this space? Okay, I'll answer the first bit about research in Singapore. I guess I can speak for the National Arts Council. If I have colleagues in the National Heritage Board and you'd like to also answer this question, you're most welcome to. So we recognize that really arts is beyond the usual MCCY outcomes of community cohesion or individual well-being, can also speak to physiological and well-being and mental well-being. So we saw during COVID, right, that people, although they didn't think that arts was essential, given a very specific survey, but still a lot of them survived circuit breaker by looking for programs in the arts, whether online or doing like craft and all that. So at the National Arts Council, we have partnered with agencies like the Dementia Association to understand how arts intervention can help some of them navigate from less well-being to better well-being. We've also partnered with NTU professor who specializes in gerontology in seeing how an arts intervention within a museum setting for seniors can also contribute to their well-being. I know the hospitals, certain hospitals are also interested in this area because we have given out a research grant for how drumming improves seniors' happiness. Right? So I suppose drumming is quite close to sport. So again, the endorphins are produced. So it is a growing area in Singapore, I would say. And I think our funders like the TOPA are also recognizing this. Right? But as to how I can recommend career options for researchers moving out of academia, I'm sorry, I don't have the answer yet. So please excuse me on that bit. Okay, let me move to a next question, which is a technical question. How do you ensure data is kept secure? There is a general mistrust of how data is used and the very real possibility of it falling into the wrong hands. I think Yuzhang, you spoke a little bit about it, but I suppose, I mean, at the highest government levels, we have the systems in place, but if you working with a smallish agency or a non-profit and all that, how do we ensure that, data privacy and all this data security is maintained?
Well, let me try to answer that or give some response first. So I think when it comes to data security, there are two concepts, right? Typically people look at. One is the data security at rest, and then the other one is data security in transit, right? So data security at rest, meaning when you host the data, when you store the data, within your organization or on the cloud, how do you make sure the whole infrastructure is secure? And I think nowadays, whether you are using a proprietary stack of technologies or you are tapping onto the open source domain, I think the data security is actually a very important concept that need to be addressed before any products can be sort of rolled out, right? So whichever solution we use or roll out within our environment, we always need to do data security testing, pen testing, to make sure that the concept of data security is addressed. And then whether it's at rest or in transit, that means when it's being transferred, all these are sort of tackled by various type of technologies. For example, in transit, we use various type of encryptions to make sure, even if you get hold of it during transit, you can't really understand or interpret what is inside. So I think definitely I agree with the question or the concerns raised. It's actually of utmost importance to make sure we protect the data that we own, and for that we actually do have a series of measures and systems and technology to do that.
Ewan, do you have anything to add to that?
For us, we work very closely with vendors who actually help us with migration of data or storage of data. So we always stress it to them that all these checks must be in place, because yeah, I mean, the last thing we need is really an attack on our website and stuff like that. So we always get our vendors help, because it's a very technical area, and yeah, it is first on the priority, security. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I would add to that to say that I think the weakest link to me often is ourselves, right? It's our attitude to all of these. I mean, if you're very laissez-faire about how we treat data and all that, that's where all the the weaknesses come. No matter how much encryption can put in place, I think if the human factor is the weakest link, somehow that can always be exploited. So it behooves all of us really to have that mindset that people have entrusted us with this data. We want to use this, and we have told them that we want to use this to improve what we can offer to them. So it is only, responsible for us to take the utmost precautions with this data. I'm reminded of, I think, an incident which happened maybe 3 or 4 years ago, where I think a marker, was it from Cambridge University, accidentally left an entire bag of exam scripts in, was it the tube or something? I was thinking, how does that happen? I mean, maybe he was really tired. So for the students in that, you can imagine the panic. Will they be unfairly, discriminated against and all that? So I'm saying, just like for us, to be very conscious all the time that this is no different from I suppose our wealth, right? Because data is a new oil and it's entrusted to us, so you should take the most care. Okay, to make up for not answering Stefan's second half of his question about his career options, please can talk to me separately on this. He's got another question for Ewan. So what are the measures that SCCC is implementing to minimize data contamination? For example, if your participants tap on multiple RFID sensors in response to a specific query.
I guess you can never completely eradicate this part. If for any reason that's beyond me, why would somebody do that? But sometimes even we do have a lot of repeated visitors. We are very blessed. We get very positive reviews about Singaporeans. So people come back, they bring their family, they bring their friends to come back and visit. So I guess if you come back and you respond differently, that doesn't, equate to data contamination. It could be just a different state of mind, So my answer to that is you can't completely get rid of data contamination that way.
Okay. Do you have a solution, Yuzhang? I mean, you've come from a different industries, you know how to avoid people going to the bank with multiple names.
I mean, yeah, because even the same name, the same person, when they go to the bank, I think in Singapore it's less of a concern. I think we have only one IC. The names and IDs are all the same. But in other countries, it may not be the case. So, the name in your IC, the name in your driver's license, name in your other IDs may not be exactly the same. So that can pose a problem. But I mean, to answer the question or to help address it, right? I think it's ultimately a data quality problem, and it's a huge one. In fact, in many industries. So before we can do any meaningful analytics, the quality must be addressed. And in fact, from our experience, there are multiple instances or cases where the idea is brilliant, the data is indeed there, but when we actually look into the data, it's not usable, right? And some data quality issues can be addressed. For example, I think the question alluded to data duplicate problem. There are some techniques, for us to address that using, for example, similarity scores. I won't go into the details, but there are approaches for addressing those. However, there are many data quality issues. It's actually very expensive to address. And that's sadly is the reality is the state of the issue.
Yeah. So maybe a sort of way to console ourselves is that in a world of big data, I suppose the contamination is we believe minimal enough that they don't skew completely, I suppose, the insights that you potentially get. But I think it's a problem if your data is not big enough, I think.
Yeah. And also I think when we deal with data quality issues, you shouldn't be boiling the whole ocean, because like I said, now with so much data that we are collecting, right? If we try to say, I want to achieve the highest quality for all the data sources that I have, it's near impossible. Rather, you should use a use case driven approach again to say, given that this is our priority use cases, which translate to these data sets from these data sources that we need to use, we should place higher priority in cleaning them. Right, this should help. This can actually help us to be more targeted, and in terms of investing money and manpower onto these kind of tasks.
Okay, yeah. Thanks, Yuzhang. Okay, Shaikh Fakhruddin has raised his hand. So, Junao, if you could sort of unmute Shaikh so he can ask his question. Then to do bits of prep, Ewan, I'm going to ask you to answer Joyce's question on what happened to sudden increase in number of votes in the Singaporean exhibit. Geraldine, I've got your question answered from NHB. I can post the answer on the chat box. Okay, Sharon, go ahead.
No, I mistakenly raised my hand.
Oh, okay, all right.
Sorry.
Okay,
I have no questions. Yeah,
okay,
sorry.
Okay,
Sorry
okay.
Okay.
Okay, but we know how you sound like, so welcome to this.
Yeah,
Okay. Okay, Geraldine, okay, maybe I'll just read out NHB's answer to Geraldine because she asked about whether museum and gallery visitor questionnaire feedback forms analyzed, and can some of the data be shared with docents, and what's popular interests and preferences, and like what SCCC showed, so that we can up our game. Yes. So NHB's answer is that yes, they have several feedback channels in place to gather insights on customer satisfaction. There's online customer satisfaction surveys, feedback forms at the counters, feedback channels via online chatbots, and NHB does value all these, and they do analyze it. So specific examples, so the NHB, this information has helped NHB understand visitors' likes and dislikes, and they'll be able to tweak the offerings. They've also helped NHB engage with customers to let them know that they're important, because you have a channel, right, to reflect your preferences. And it's also a call to NHB to constantly improve. So NHB says they do conduct regular sharing sessions with docents and volunteers on a variety of topics. So I suppose, Geraldine, if you would like to leave your contact with us, so we can get NHB to ensure that you're included in their sharing session next. Okay. I hope that answers the question. Okay, Ewan, if you'd like to answer Joy's question.
Yeah, as I shared earlier, shortly after the opening of Singapore Wurn, we went into circuit breaker. So there were like 6 months where there was no activity. And that's why there is this sudden increase in the number of votes between 2020 to 2021, the figures that I shared just now. Yeah.
Okay. Right, thanks, Ewan. Joy, if you have further things on that, maybe you can type in the question and answer box. I'm conscious that we have only 5 minutes left, and I don't want to go you guys back from your evening. So just one last question by Jonathan, who asked, how valuable is real-time data taken from social media to help an organization measure its effectiveness? Right. So even will you, I suppose, being in management in SCCC, so if you do use social media data, is it really valuable to help you? Yeah.
Perhaps I shall quote another example in my organization. We have a Friday free concert, a free concert that is called TGIF Music Station. It's almost fortnightly. And of course, during COVID, we changed our format. From a live event, it became online. And now it's completely online. And the online figures were very healthy and always increasing. So we are happy with the results, meaning that now more viewers actually catch our show. And then there's a trend that we noticed from social media. At first we did the live streaming. The live streaming numbers were high and significantly high. But over the past few months, it has come down. So people who try and catch up over the weekend to watch the show, actually the numbers have increased. So such trends would actually help us tweak our program. Perhaps some we may not even consider going into a live streaming mode, from the viewpoint of costs and all that. And such data it has a very direct impact on how we program here. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Ewan. Okay, the admin people have been bugging me to wrap up, and we have well done, Yuzhang and Ewan. We have answered all the questions. Okay, so I'm going to thank all of you who have stayed with us, of course our speakers and our 149 participants who stayed with us to the very end. And then I'll hand the time back to Vaish if you have any last minute instructions.
Thank you.
Thanks both.
Thank you.
Hi.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your questions. I think you would agree that it has been a very engaging session, and we hope that you have a better understanding on how to get the best out of data analytics, and also how we can apply it into our arts and culture sector. We'd like to take this opportunity to thank our speakers and moderator for sharing their insights and for the inspiring discussion we had today. We have come to the end of the webinar today. Before you leave the session, we would appreciate if you could provide us with your feedback. You may access the feedback form via the link or scan the QR code shown on the screen. If you would like to find out more about Culture Academy's programs, please visit www.cultureacademy.gov.sg, and you may check out our past webinars and resources that may be of interest to you. Thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar in February 2022. Till then, stay safe and healthy. Thank you.